Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Dr. David Snow. He is the senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute think tank, as well as a professor at the University of Guelph. Dave, one of your points in your articles about this DEI and federal granting agencies indicated that you felt that universities also need substantial reforms. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of issues with universities and a lot that I'm frankly, I'm not an expert in university governance, but I think that if we're saying that research agencies ought to be committed to research excellence first and foremost in terms of their research priorities, then we should say the same for universities. And I think that there has been a huge push, especially really since COVID, since George Floyd at the universities, to push this language of EDI and to push a lot of more activist initiatives. And to be frank, I'm not saying we need to, as many, as maybe as what's going on in Florida, replace these progressive activist initiatives with conservative ones. I don't think universities should be engaging in activism. There's all sorts of other avenues for activism.
Mm.
I think our research should be, first and foremost, yes, about changing the world and making it a better place, but committed to objective knowledge creation. And so I think that actually the granting agencies are much less infused with EDI considerations. When I look at just emails I get from my university administration and the message board, I'd say roughly a quarter, maybe more, are like explicitly activist EDI things. And I think that there's a lot of factors going into this, including the sort of over administration of universities in recent years. But I think that's one thing that certainly needs to be formed at just about every university across the board.
Should it brought more broadly in society, should this be an election issue in some way?
Certainly, given the moment that Canada is facing, I wouldn't expect it to be. And what's interesting is that post-secondary education, even before this, has just been entirely absent from the federal election. Now, post-secondary is primarily provincial jurisdiction, but the granting agencies is federal jurisdiction. And so I would hope that I don't expect this to become an election issue. But I think broadly speaking, the sort of future of these granting agencies is a really important issue for government. Collectively, these three agencies, I should have said from the outset, their expenditures were almost $4 billion last year, and
Right.
the federal government committed new funding. Haven't been able to sort of work out exactly what the new budgets will be. They say 30% in some areas. It'll be over $4 billion this next year unless something changes. So that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money that is the vast majority of which is just directly going to individual researchers, such as myself. I should say I'm sure funded for research I'm doing on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so there ought to be a lot more scrutiny about what the priorities are from these agencies, how much funding is going there, and how this is, you know, uh, uh, increasing the expectations of certain researchers to frame their research in a particular way. So I do think the granting agencies ought to be a bigger political issue. I don't expect it to be an election issue, but I'll say one more thing on that is that
Sure.
this is reflective of what's gone on beyond the granting agencies. When we talk about the bloat at the federal bureaucracy and all of the things that the federal government is doing now, the huge growth in the number of federal public servants, I think it's worth looking at how much of this is because of EDI initiatives. I don't think it's a huge portion, but it's not happening alone at the federal granting agencies. And so I think some sort of audit is important, whether you approve of these initiatives or not, to say how much space is EDI taking up at these agencies and at sort of every federal department across the board. I don't expect it to be an election issue. There's probably more important things going on in Canada right now, but I do think it's something that I would expect whoever wins, that the government and opposition parties ought to look at seriously.
By this, you mean that there's a massive expansion in EDI offices and officers? Is that part of what you're saying?
Yeah, I can't speak about officers in particular. I've only really looked at this one set of agencies, and even then, it
Mm.
was difficult. I couldn't determine how much of their budget is dedicated to EDI. I could say these specific grants, but certainly that is something what you've just described that is definitely true of universities, right?
Right.
Universities, the sort of EDI offices within colleges at the senior administration level, committees at the department level, they have expanded considerably. I'd be very curious to know, because we know that there's a lot of EDI guidelines in the federal public service, how this is not just affecting their budgets, but affecting their work in terms of the research they're doing.
We've run out of time, but really interesting discussion. I appreciate you coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Really interesting discussion with Dr. Dave Snow there about DEI programs in the federal granting agencies, the impact on universities and on researchers. Thanks for being along for this interesting discussion. We'll see you next time.